Hey, it's David Perdue from MyNAMS.com and the Novice to Advanced Marketing System, and welcome to our weekly live training. I'm really excited you guys are here today. We do this every Wednesday afternoon, about 2:30 in the afternoon. We get a guest expert on. Sometimes it's a NAMS instructor, sometimes it's completely new to our system, and sometimes it's somebody that was introduced to me by somebody else that I did not know but now do, and that's the case today. We have with us today Paul Jenkins, who was introduced to me by one of our NAMS instructors, and he actually called me and said, you may not know this guy, he's kind of new to the online world, but he's got a really interesting background that could add a lot to your NAMS community. And after I talked to him via Skype, he's in England, I'm here, so we were trying to catch up on Skype. And after I talked to him on Skype, I realized, absolutely, this is a guy who's got some knowledge that transfers into the online marketing world. One of the things that you guys, if you know me, you know that I love taking advantage of our history, our experience. To me, that builds who we are, that builds the business that we're going to have. And if you try to emulate other people in the online marketing world, you go out there and try to become somebody else that you're not, it's never successful. I don't think it's ever successful because it doesn't last long. You can't put on that charade very long. And one of the things that I am, you guys know me, you know that I am a former journalist. You know that I'm a former consultant. You know that I've built my own house. You know all these things about me that I keep telling you because that's who I am. Paul Jenkins is a documentary filmmaker, and he's been all over the world, and he has created documentaries on people like Mikhail Gorbachev. I've seen some of the work he's done in Africa and other places, and so I really was interested in how he made the shift to online marketing and why he's moving into the online business world and what's leading up to all of that. So we're going to have a conversation today. There's not going to be any slides. And it's really going to be a conversation today about taking our history, our experience, and converting that into an online business. So I think this is going to be pretty interesting, and you might want to hang out here. We'll try to keep this to 60 minutes, and respect your time. But also, we're going to have a really good conversation. If you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat box. In fact, I would love for you to put it in the chat box right now that you can hear and see, and that everything is working as it should. So, Paul, with that introduction, welcome, and I'm glad you made it all the way from across the pond for us. So, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'm actually sitting in my Paris apartment, David, which is a tiny 6th-floor walk-up overlooking the roofs of central Paris right now. And isn't it fantastic that we can have this kind of conversation and just broadcast out there?
I know it is. You and I have been around a while, and the changes we've seen in the last 15 years are just unbelievable. I mean, we knew in 1975 that digital photography and digital broadcasting was going to change the journalism world, but people didn't know what that change was going to be until about 2000, and that really has had a huge impact. So tell us a little bit about you and how you got started online, okay?
Well, started online, let me think, about 2 years ago, making all the classic mistakes of dreaming big dreams, coming up with incredibly complex and unwieldy mind maps of projects to be. I suppose coming from a broadcasting, film background, I sort of felt, well, this should be fairly straightforward, and of course I had absolutely no idea of the kind of jungle and swamp that it can be. So I started about 2 years ago, playing around with some ideas for membership sites, trying to teach myself a bit of coding, getting into WordPress a bit, until I hit the buffers around 6 to 7 months ago, and I realized, hang on a second, there's no one coming. How do I get an audience to any of this? And at that stage, I started to understand there was something called internet marketing and online marketing, and started to look quite, get into that fairly seriously. So it's been a 2-year journey, and for me, as you say, as you said, it's a concurrent activity. It's alongside my activity as a filmmaker. I'm still directing films, basically, so I'm running the two in parallel.
So tell people what that means, that you're a filmmaker, and how long have you been doing that? Give us some examples.
I started that Yeah, well, I did a degree in Russian and Soviet studies back in the late 1980s. So my degree was outmoded the moment I finished it. You know, the Soviet Union collapsed, and I was looking for a job. And very fortuitously, I got a job with BBC Television's science department. They were running a show called Tomorrow's World, and they were looking for a guy who spoke Russian and knew a bit about science. Well, that was me. And so I started doing a little bit of work with Tomorrow's World, and bit by bit kind of clawed my way into the television ecosystem. As you know, getting into a decent journalistic job or decent film job is far from straightforward, but basically worked my way up and started getting directing breaks around 16, 17 years ago. So I've been basically a film director for the last, 16, 17 years. Principally documentaries. Have done some other stuff, but mostly it's been feature documentaries, international investigations, history documentaries, personal profiles, social stuff, science films, basically covering the bases.
So tell us where we might have seen some of those documentaries.
Well, my first big film was a film back in 1999 about the Russian army called Soldat. And what we did was to find an ordinary Russian army base in the middle of nowhere, and we managed to get access to film the soldiers inside that base for 8 months.
Wow!
And basically going backwards and forwards to document the lives of these soldiers. And in particular, we were interested in what they called the rule of the grandfathers in this base, which is an informal system of control whereby inside the barrack rooms you have this kind of system of organized bullying, basically, that keeps the younger soldiers in control, then gets the older soldiers habituated and so forth. And you know, it was a very tough target journalistically in terms of a film to make, but ended up becoming quite a film I love, actually, to be honest, called Soldat, which in Russian means soldier. So that one went around the world. Another film was A Cry from the Grave, where I was assistant director with a wonderful director called Leslie Woodhead, who on occasion has worked with Terry Malick, so it gives you some idea of the level. And that was a film where we spent a year in Bosnia investigating a massacre in the town of Srebrenica, and made a big film about that. I don't know. I mean, there've been many. I mean, I suppose I'm principally known for kind of fairly hardcore investigations into Al Qaeda, kind of Russian Revolution, mafia in Russia. What else? All that kind of
Paul,
stuff.
you seem like such a mild-mannered guy. I mean, you seem like we wouldn't guess that you're one of those guys who go after the mafia and stick a microphone in their face or something, you know?
Well, I think this is the big secret. It's that kind of Dr. Evil moment, isn't it? You know, mwahaha. It's kind of,
that's right. That's right. You know, that's right.
I think actually, as I say, I learned Russian, and in Russian they have an expression called "suliцы na gubах." It means with a smile on the lips, you know, and you know, kind of you kind of, you know, walk softly but carry a very, very big stick.
Right.
And I think if you know, these things are always about some kind of a negotiation. It's always about basically, you know, kind of trying to feel the situation accurately, basically to understand, you know, what one can construct and how, and you know, what's going to be workable. And you know, the problem with film is you actually have to film the damn stuff. You know, if you could simply go out and find the story and just kind of write the story down, it would be wonderful. It would be, you know, it would be 100 times easier. But with film, you're always, of course, having to, you know, basically film the interviews or acquire the footage or what have you. And so, yeah, it's very often you have to sort of, just kind of slowly work your way in, gain trust, get good relationships with people, relationships of trust, understand the parameters, understand some of the places where you can't tread, and you know, understand what is you know, it's kind of the art of the impossible. You know, you have to figure out, okay, this is what I really want in the film. How do I slowly get there till finally I get the result? You know.
Okay, so that sentence that you just used, understanding the parameters, understanding what you want, and how to get there, the art of the impossible, all of that. That actually sounds to me like you're talking about online marketing, you know, because it is pretty much the same kind of thing. I mean, it is really building a project where you're building something out of thin air for online marketing. And so I know a little bit about filmmaking. I've taken some classes, and I was also the first AD on a couple of small films. So I understand the role of the first AD and of the director, and it's massive project management, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, when and the first thing to say is I've been involved in about, I suppose, 45 productions over the last, you know, 20 odd years, maybe about 20 feature-length films, if you like, and not a single one of those productions hasn't had monstrous problems on multiple occasions through each film, you know, and
Right.
very much part of it is actually kind of contingency and crisis management. I mean, it's actually very important, first of all, to have that mental attitude. Okay, I know that a whole bunch of things are going to go wrong here. You know, I'm ready for that. This is what I can anticipate going wrong, and these are going to be my kind of plans B, C, and D to deal with that. So you know, kind of contingency planning and having a plan B and C is critical. But the other thing is basically to kind of remind yourself 3 times a day, what am I actually doing here? You know, because with film, I think like online marketing, it's very easy to get diverted. You know, it's very easy to go down multiple small alleyways and forget the dream and vision that you had at the beginning of the film. You know, and it's very important to actually carry a little notebook around with you and actually, you know, and basically just remind yourself, actually, this is the film that I set out to make, or this is what the dream was. You know.
You know, you mentioned mind mapping.
Yeah.
You mentioned mind mapping earlier, and one of the things I teach people in our coaching classes is that you create a mind map. You start with an end vision on your mind map, and then you create action steps to get to the end vision, but you always are modifying to make sure that you keep that end vision in place so that you make sure that you hit the target, right? Or that you end up modifying the end vision, right? You can always do that as well. And one of the things that you're describing in this filmmaking process is that this has been great background and great kind of preparation for you to branch out into another problem-solving world as you're doing with the online marketing. So let's talk about a little bit about that and how that has come about.
Yeah, I think, you know, I've had to ask myself a number of quite tough questions over the last couple of years or so, and you know, I suspect, like many people in you know, in the NAMS community, in the NAMS audience, and one of those questions certainly is, okay, the world is in revolution, communications is in revolution, selling and business is in revolution, filmmaking is in revolution, audiences and audiencing, as they would say on the West Coast, is you know, in revolution. You know, and this will sound rather tough, but you know, you either kind of get with the program or you don't. You know, I've gone around towns in France, for example, quite seriously. There's a town called Laon up in northern France I had to go to a few months ago, and on the high street, the main street of this town, every third shop is closed. Every third shop in the high street in this town. Even in Paris, I'm walking around and I'm seeing, you know, physical shops closing. And you know, my business, the movie business, the film business, is very much, you know, in the throes of change, and you know, it's pretty nervous about this, frankly. I mean, you know, in MIPCOM in Cannes, which is one of the big television business festivals, if you like, in Cannes, in the south of France, you know, last year they had a conference where they were talking about the second screen. You know, this idea that the iPad is kind of the second screen and the TV or the cinema screen is the first screen. And of course, frankly, this is nonsense. Actually, you know, if you're under 30 years old, the chances are the iPad is the first screen. Thanks very much. And you know, one of the things I've been doing in Paris is actually I carry a camera around with me most days. And whenever I see a TV set that's been abandoned in the street, I take a picture. I'm actually keeping a documentary record of abandoned TV sets, and you know, the writing is on the writing is on the wall. It's online audiencing, reaching people online, being able to communicate online, being able to market your business or yourself online is absolutely the be-all and end-all, frankly, these days. And so to go back to that original thought, I just thought, well, you know, hey, are you going to get with the program here or not? Are you going to stay fossilized in the old world of television and documentary filmmaking, or are you going to develop the capacity basically to reach out and touch people internationally with all the online mechanisms available? So that's how I frame it, I guess.
Yes, so this is really an interesting thing to me because the NAMS community, more than any other community that I know of, I kind of feel like sometimes we're the Statue of Liberty. You know, give us your poor, give us your disenfranchised, give us all of those, right? So because people are in transition. I mean, everybody I talk to is in transition of some sort, and that's the reason we get an audience that is over 45 years old, and they're mostly women, and they're very serious folks because they have great experience, right? They have good knowledge. They have had a skill in something that they were very good at in most cases. And many of them want to learn how to take that online. So now you're doing that in filmmaking. And you're doing that with your journalistic capabilities as well. So talk about the transition for you and what you've gone through and what skills you found, and I know interviewing is one of those, what skills you found that really translate to online business.
I think, to be very honest, I was hearing you very carefully when you were talking about the profile of at least many of the people in your audience, you know, and I think that one of the important things is to understand when one's made mistakes. And boy, have I made a lot. I mean, bright shiny object syndrome, buying all sorts of, you know, push button plugins that frankly get you nowhere. Certainly, you know, trying to spread myself too thinly in order to cover the ground. I mean, I've made all of the classic mistakes, you know, that I'm sure many people in the audience will be very familiar with. So I suppose, frankly, out of the, say, 7 months of my online marketing and internet marketing learning journey, I would say about the first 3 to 4 months were pure kind of, you know, the lowest of the low apprentice, you know, is kind of really scrabbling around, trying to get an education effectively by any which means, and basically failing. But then I think there comes a certain point at which you kind of just realize, well, look, I'm either going to get this done, and I'm either going to understand how to sequence things properly, learn to filter out the rubbish, and listen to the people who actually do know what they're talking about, and get a, you know, understand what you were saying earlier about, you know, your identity and your voice online. I'm either going to understand what is the strength of my identity and voice and find a way to leverage that and put that out there in the right way, or this is going to fail. And I think that there comes that kind of seminal moment where you just kind of think, okay, now let's stop messing around. We've had the education. Let's chuck out the rubbish. Let's now focus down on 2 or 3 things that are almost certainly going to work. And very, very importantly, find out where to stamp my identity into the products I'm making, or the products I'm representing, or the way in which I'm promoting, and so forth. You know, and that's been my kind of psychological evolution, I guess, over the last 7 months.
So
I think yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of specific methods and so forth that might come out of the broadcasting world, and you know, particular techniques and so forth. I mean, you know, you know, they call Hollywood the dream factory, right? And you know, people talk about documentary film as you know, imagining reality, if you like. It's about the construction of an illusion, even though you're actually trying to communicate something maybe quite complex about the world out there through a film, you know, through a sequences of images and interventions, interview interventions and so forth in a film, to put together a structural narrative that is basically going to move people emotionally. And so actually that kind of stuff, I think, can be very important online, because essentially people have so little time these days. They have so little patience, you know. If they hit a website and they don't see something interesting within the first 2 or 3 seconds, the chances are that they're just out. You know, the concept of the sales letter, Jeff Walker, the sideways sales letter, how do we keep people engaged in the process, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's in a way, it's a wonderful thing, because it's playing with the form of this in the same way that a filmmaker plays with the clay of a film, if that makes sense. You know, it's taking you know, you can sort of say, okay, my objective here is I want to make so many sales, I want to reach this audience, I want to reach them in this way, and then effectively thinking, okay, what have I got that I can put into that clay and put there to actually gain the audience, to get clients, to get people to engage, to get people to want to know, trust, and like me. You know, that's some of the connections I see between, if you like, filmmaking and you know, and online.
Yeah, so when you were talking about doing documentary filmmaking and you talked about all about building the relationships with the people so you could go in and ask the tough questions or do the investigation or whatever it was, that really is what we're doing as well, is trying to build the relationships with people so that they trust us enough to be able to conduct business with us, right? And so that we can help them in their lives. I mean, it has to come from that perspective. And so what are some of the specific things that you're doing with your filmmaking background that help you do that in today's world a little better?
I think well, I know that in the online world, one talks about avatars and the importance of persona and understanding okay, who is the client and so on and so forth. And certainly in any film I've made that's been any good, bonding with the interviewees and bonding with the subjects of the film is absolutely crucial. It's absolutely essential to have an emotional connection with the people who one is dealing with. And if that authentic emotional connection doesn't exist, then frankly the film is going to fail, because you simply won't get the kind of the true representation of what really matters for that person down on camera. And we can talk about this maybe a bit more, but particularly the role of video online and film and and images are an incredibly sensitive radar to emotional authenticity. You screw it up for a millisecond and people will just feel it. I mean, subliminal imaging, and for example, is a powerful thing because the eye doesn't necessarily detect it, but the brain does. And so it's understanding how to basically get someone to communicate in that way, an authentic way, a powerful way, carrying information with emotion is, I mean, it's critical in filmmaking, but I suspect that in the online world it's very, very important as well, particularly in an online world where video is becoming more and more important as the carrier of what we're trying to do, whether it's selling or gaining an audience or getting people to sign up or prospecting or lead generation, whatever it may be.
Right, and we're being overrun, it seems like, with video these days. I mean, everybody has a lot of video. Everybody has a Hangout. The tools are so accessible. One of the things that I've tried to do is really focus in on what I'm good at, what my skill sets have been in the past, and how I can bring those online. You've talked about doing exactly the same thing, and I love the tools that allow us now to reach out to as many people as we can possibly do, whether it's via advertising or via our email list or whatever it is, to present our side to them. With filmmaking, and with that as your background, let's get into some video kind of tips here for doing interviews with people and making sure that you're connecting. How do you make sure that you connect with people via interviews?
Well, I mean, the very first thing is to do what you and I did before doing this, which is, we had a conversation. There's an off-camera conversation. That's crucial, really, to have that connection with the person, prior to actually plomping them down in front and hitting the live button. You don't want to go on air with someone straight away, say through a Hangout or whatever it is, or if you're recording an interview on a camera, for example, you don't just plonk them straight in front of the camera and just go for it. Even if you only have a few seconds, it's vital to use that pre-interview time to get a good connection with the person. And the second thing is to be very flexible. I find in the approach. Sometimes in the professional world, I've seen presenters or journalists write down a list of precise questions, and they stick to this like glue. This is the crib. This must be followed. It can't be deviated from. And frankly, that just ain't going to work. It's much better, in my experience, to write down, say, a list of 8 bullet points of something that of the terrain you want to cover. I mean, what are you basically trying to get? But then be very, very flexible about the sequencing of that in the interview. And sometimes I've had a game plan for an interview. I've sat down. It's clear from the behavior of the person that this is not going to work. First thing you do is rip that up and go to the end, drag out the end of the interview first, and just quickly restructure it on the fly. And just basically have a good connection with the person. Be listening very, very carefully for the clues inside the answers that are going to tell you, okay, this is where the really interesting territory is going to be in this, in this interview. It's for example. So yeah, to be very, very flexible. not to use written questions or written crib. Just have a glance at that just before the interview, and then just put it down, put it away, make eye contact, and simply go for it.
Yeah, so making eye contact is it's really a difficult thing to do online, since you're doing the video back and forth, and the tendency is to look at the screen that's in front of you instead of the camera that's above you in most cases. So it's really important. I have to try very hard to make that eye contact via the camera, because if you don't look in there, then you don't get the eye contact, right? So Art is asking here, what's the best way to build that emotional connect? And you're talking about some of that, but do you do a when you're really trying to build an emotional connection, that happens someplace in the interview, right? It doesn't happen in the beginning of the interview. It doesn't happen in the pre-interview. It has to happen somehow during the interview where you're live. So talk about that piece of it as well.
I think that there's a dynamic that changes, first of all, when you actually start to record. Even if it's a pre-recorded interview with a camera, or whether like now it's basically live over a webcam or whatever it is, the moment you're live, if you like, it ups the ante. Suddenly it's there's a different feeling to the communication you're having with the person. But if prior to that, you don't talk out the questions. My advice would be don't cover all of the ground prior to actually doing the interview or the chat with the person, if you like. Because if you do that, and I've seen it happen in television films many times, the person is going to say, well, I told you that 10 minutes ago. Why should I tell you that again? Or if they do decide to tell you the story again, well, they're gonna it's gonna be kind of humdrum. It's gonna be like a scene out of Monty Python, and you just don't want that. I mean, what you want is someone telling you, sharing the experience for the first time, live on the camera. When you've actually got them in front of the webcam, or you're filming them. Yeah. So there's that. I think the storytelling imperative, even I would say, in the human soul is incredibly powerful. And so whenever you can get someone telling a story, somewhere inside your interview or your presentation, that's going to work for you. And so, the classic formulations in documentary filmmaking, at least, are things like, tell me a little bit about this, or, tell me about this time when, and that tell me about formulation is really powerful, because you can just drop that in there, sit back, and let the person tell a story. And 9 times out of 10, that's going to be a wonderful way also to build that emotional connection with the person. We love telling stories. We love listening to stories. That's
So we love listening to stories and we love telling stories, but there's a listening component that is as important, correct? Because if I don't hear what you said, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, but if I don't hear what you said and I don't relate to that, or kind of throw it back at you as a connection point, to me, that back in my journalism days, that was when they went to the very next thing that you weren't going to get, because you really had to kind of pave the way for them to open up even more.
Yeah, I mean the follow-up question is also a bit of an art form, in the sense that to ask a good follow-up question, you absolutely have to have been listening very, very attentively to what the person's been saying, to pick up on the idea inside what they've said that's going to be the right idea for the follow-up question, to develop the thought, to get the gold, basically. Because frankly, whether you're talking to a chief executive of a corporation, you might be making, say, a communications film, a marketing film, or you might be talking to, you might be talking to, I don't know, someone on the shop floor, a factory worker, a farmer, whatever it is. Someone, so you're only going to get the gold out of that person if you're able to do those follow-up questions, to take their first idea or their first statement, which very often is going to be a bit bland, they're going to be a bit nervous, they're not going to really share what's interesting, and you're able to basically steer it through to something that's truly interesting, and it's going to jump out on screen, basically. And you always know when you're getting it, because basically the person's going to become a little bit alive on the screen in front of you. Their eyes are going to start to glisten a bit. It's like the Blade Runner empathy test. You're gonna know that moment when you're connecting with someone, and they're giving you the stuff you need. It's that stuff right. That I mean, if you feel that, your audience is going to feel that. If you don't feel that,
So Ann is asking here, are there any general question areas that entices the person you are interviewing to allow them to relax, get them at ease, which allows them to open up? So do you have any tricks there? Any areas that you
Yeah,
jump into to begin with?
yeah. I mean, obviously, it would depend on the subject of the interview, but I would 9 times out of 10, I would. I mean, first of all, I think it's important to always to thank the person. You know, even before you start with all the questions and so forth. You know, simply thank them for being there. You know, thank you for doing this. Thank you. You know, that immediately is going to get them to relax a bit, because they then think you know, what's going through their mind is, well, you know, this is a welcoming, collaborative environment. That's, you know, so don't just plonk them in front of the camera and just go straight into the question. You know, that's going to they're going to be like a rabbit in the headlights, right?
Right.
Specific questions, though, you know, open questions certainly, and lob in the first couple of questions, lob in fairly gentle questions, you know, to let them warm up a bit, let them get into it a bit. You know, you'll start to understand their style and pace and their, you know, the way they like to communicate. You're going to get that quite rapidly with someone. You know. So 9 times out of 10, I'd ask them really quite an open question just to kick off, and you know, if they ramble on too long, then you can always, you know, sort of cut them down. It's amazing how you can control an interview with eye movement or with hand movement, for example, to get someone to speed up, slow down, stop a bit, you know, stop at that moment. But I would, 9 times out of 10, I would lob in quite a general question about, you know, something like, for example, if I was talking to someone about, for example, the improvement in farming in Ohio, I could chuck in a question which would be something like, you know, well, you know, farming seems to have improved a bit in Ohio. You know, how do you feel about that? And then just, you know, just sit back a bit and, you know, let them go on for, you know, for a few minutes, and you know, you're going to get a lot of information in those 3 or 4 minutes about how they see the situation and about how they are as a communicator. Meanwhile, they're going to be relaxing, the shoulders are going to be dropping down, you know, you can relax with your body language, you're going to settle into a nice energy, and then you can bang in, yeah, but what about the combine harvesters that failed last year? Whatever, you know, I mean, you can start to, you know, to push it more to the point of what you're trying to get, you know.
So sometimes, though, when you're interviewing somebody, there's an intimidation factor, right? It might be somebody that you have some preconceived ideas about. For example, you know, I know that you did an interview or were part of a crew that did interviews with Mikhail Gorbachev. You know, and this is the former president of Soviet Union, and really was the guy that was instrumental in the breaking down of the old system, the old Soviet system. So I've been in situations like that as well. We did the same kind of crew interview with President Carter in Atlanta, and even CEOs, when you go into their office, there's an intimidation factor, right? People who are incredibly successful. How much do you use what's in the room? One of my favorite tricks was to go into the room, look around, find family pictures, and relate to those pictures, and start talking about family and talking about things that you could have just general conversations about. So how much do you use that, and how can you do that online?
Yeah. Well, certainly. I mean, with Gorbachev, for example, the situation was that we were going in with a friend of his, and the friend was doing the interview, and I was directing the interview. So, in that sense, I suppose I was lucky that there was someone who already had a connection with him. And in that situation, you know, I think the truth is that the people like that, they don't have a lot of time. You know, time is the most precious thing they have. And so really what it's about is getting quite a quick connection, a good connection. You know, everyone understands, okay, we're serious about this. This is a trusting environment. We're going to do the job properly. We're going to check the equipment. We're going to do it professionally to make sure that we're getting the stuff down on the tape, or we're getting the stuff recorded, that the audio's okay. So we're not going to be so intimidated that we forget to actually check the cables and run a 45-second technical test before we start the main interview. So we will do that, please, and we'll also make sure the lighting's right and everything else. But then once we're ready, nice and calmly, we're going to go, because we understand we're going to kick it off, because we understand that your time is valuable. We're going to get the stuff down that we need to get down. So certainly in filmmaking or television making, you know, it's like that. I would say some of those lessons translate across online, frankly. I mean, I think that, you know, again, people's time is valuable, and so, you want to make sure the equipment works, basically. Do a little test before you kick it off. I mean, if you're using a new webinar software, it's a pretty good idea to try it out with a few friends before you do it.
That's right.
Do it for real, for example.
Been there, done
have
that.
capacity. Been there, and I can tell you, I've screwed up my first 2 webinars. Have capacity built in. If you've got someone who can ride shotgun for you on the technical side, that's going to help you a lot as well. So you can actually just concentrate on the content side, for example, and things like that. But I think with the important people and so forth, the thing to remember is that actually they're probably more nervous than you. Actually, they have more to lose. They have higher to fall. The fall down to the ground is going to be an almighty crash if they fall. So, in my experience, if you basically indicate to them, look, this is going to be a collaborative, trustworthy environment where we're going to be getting you to share good stuff, but we're not going to try and stitch you up and kind of throw you a left field question that's going to embarrass you severely, unless you need to do that.
Right.
Then that's going to help. That's going to help a lot, because they're then going to be in a mindset where they're going to be happy to share things with you.
So just a quick aside here: when you are watching other people do interviews, do you hear answers to questions and then the interviewer moves on? And this happens to me all the time, and I say to myself, what, you're going to let that pass? Are you going to just not follow up on that question? Because that's where the detail was and all of the ripeness of this interview. They're so focused on getting to the next question that sometimes miss that great opportunity to kind of deviate.
Well, the beauty of being a director, David, is that actually you can play all sorts of tricks on the presenters and journalists. And for example, it can be, sorry, cut. The battery's just run out. Now, just whilst we change the battery, maybe it's an idea just to pop that in, yeah. Or, and actually, at the BBC, there used to be an expression where if someone was basically dull as ditch water and you really didn't want to spend tape on them, the cameraman would normally say, I think it's a bit of a strawberry filter job here, and the director would say, yeah, I think a bit of strawberry filter is required. Strawberry filter meant you literally did not record. You let them warble on for a bit prior to the point that you would actually, cut in. Similarly, there was another trick whereby if someone was insanely nervous, you would simply say to them, look, we're just going to run a quick rehearsal here. We'll just try a little rehearsal. Of course, you are actually turning over. You are actually filming, right? And so and the chances are that's going to be your good stuff. So yeah, I've often had a situation where I felt, oh God, why on earth hasn't this been asked? And let's just get this to happen, please. And I usually take a decision. Okay, do I play one of those little directorial sort of tricks, or do I store them up on my little list? I just make a list of notes, and at the end of the interview say, right, okay, I'd just like to pick up on a few things, please. And there is this kind of directory sort of language, if you like. Actors use it as well. There's a kind of language of communication on a set, communication when filmmaking. Everyone understands what's happening. It's very polite. It's very civilized. But basically, what you're saying is, okay, let's get this done. Let's make sure we don't go away without this. But done in a gentle way.
Okay. And we have a couple of questions here. Ted's saying, is there a secret to getting people to give you the interview in the first instance, apart from asking? In other words,
yeah.
Is there a way to ask?
Do your research. First of all, do your research. It's pretty hard to find someone these days who hasn't got some kind of presence online, some kind of blog. They aren't on YouTube somewhere, something like that. And absolutely, step one is go out there and do 5-10 minutes of Google research. Check out what is the profile of this person, how do they come across, how do they behave, how do they communicate, what do they sound like. And then you can couch your approach to that person with that in mind. You can pick up on something you found in that initial research in your approach to that person in the email. I was very interested to see you talking at San Diego University last week about blam, blam, blam. I'd really like to talk to you about that on camera. And they're going to be impressed. They're going to think, okay, this person has bothered to actually check me out.
Okay. And yep. Anne is saying, so you also talked about shoulders relaxing. Are there other body language signals that you should watch for, good or bad?
Yeah, I mean, well, the obvious body language ones, of course, to do with defensive posture. You know, so how you know how has someone relaxed up? Are they making good eye contact with you, or are they looking away? Are they sweating? Is a good one. You know, how they wear their hands, and so on and so forth. There's a series of body language tells that are fairly well established, I think. But also, you can tell if someone has relaxed from the pacing of their delivery. You know, if someone's varying the pacing around and allowing themselves to think a bit in their answer instead of simply babbling away like a brook, but you know, if someone is actually now and again halting in the middle of their sentence and just thinking it through, the chances are that's good. You know, we don't all have to be, you know, Robert De Niro. Sometimes it's better to stolter a bit and think your way through. You're going to find something more interesting that way, and the chances are that's when someone's actually relaxed when they're doing that. You know, so allow them the space actually to make mistakes, because those mistakes are going to then actually deliver you something more interesting. You know, the world of the soundbite, I would say, is quite dangerous it's dangerous in filmmaking, and I think it can even be dangerous online because it negates authenticity. And so if what we're after are a series of advertising-style sound bites, okay, that might work for an advert, but it's not necessarily going to work for what you're trying to communicate from a business. You know,
right.
Again, the kind of the BS detector in the audience is very, very strong, in my opinion.
Yeah. So to follow up a little bit on that, have you ever been in a situation, I'm sure you have you ever been in a situation where you feel like the interviewee took over and became the interviewer, or just basically took over your entire process? And how do you get that back?
You know, I had to do the BBC has a wonderful exercise called obituary films. And this is where you make a film about someone as though they've just died, so that this film can go in a cupboard somewhere in the BBC and be hauled out when this very important person dies, so the BBC can put out a film immediately. And I had to make one of these films about a British Prime Minister fairly recently. And I remember and so this meant literally going around this person's friends, family, and colleagues, interviewing them as though he just passed away. You know, it's a surreal, bizarre experience. You know? and it's like something out of a kind of Kafka novel. You know, and so basically, I remember one of the interviewees was a very controlling personality, and I can't name him unfortunately, but anyway, he was an extremely controlling personality, and you know, at that stage, there are some psychological tricks one has to use to actually get the person to engage properly. And the first one can do is simply look away. You know, I mean, simply stop paying attention. They'll stop talking at a certain point, and you can actually then at least get the interview back on track somewhere where it's interesting. Or you know, you can actually use scarcity, for example, as a tactic inside an interview. You can start looking at the watch, you know, and you can. And you know, I mean, most people are going to pick up that hint at some point.
Right. All right. So
I'll probably never do another film. I'll probably never do another film again after this, David.
You think? Well, you know, just to follow up on something you said there that I think is really interesting is one that I always was in the newspaper business. I would always look at the guy who was the Obit writer, sitting over here in the corner. His name was Tom, and I always thought, boy, Tom, I wouldn't want your job. In fact, one day I told him, I said, Tom, I just would not want your job because, you know, just writing about people who have died or are going to die as an Obit writer is just like, you know, it's just kind of creepy. And he said it's the best job in the world because nobody wants to talk more about openly about somebody than if they've just died or if they know it's an obit that is being put in the can. And like you just said, in the newspaper business, they will go out for prominent people and write an obituary long before the person dies. And then they just update it over the years as they go. So it's sitting over there ready to use and pull out. That's how newspapers have these long, and magazines have these long obituaries for people who just passed away, you know, 30 minutes ago. And that's how that works. But it is really interesting that that's the place where people can connect the most is when you're talking about somebody's passing. And I find that to be an interesting point where we don't want to talk so much to the living, but about the passing is really an easy way to talk to people.
I mean, it is absolutely, I was going to say, David, it's absolutely surreal, though, sitting down with someone who's a friend of someone and having to put the question, so how was X? You know, what kind of person was he? You know, it's just, it's head spinning, actually, honestly. But sorry, I cut across.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Tom actually told me once that he was doing an interview with an Obit interview for somebody who was a prominent figure, and the guy stopped him halfway through and he said, "Are you writing my obituary?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I am actually. We're just getting it prepared." And it was very uncomfortable. But you know, then the guy realized what they were doing, and he wanted to make sure all the key points of his life were included in the article. So you know, that was the exposure was actually a good thing in the end. So let's see. Ann here is nope. We got Ann's question. Dave says, "Do you have any tips for a good interview edit? Is there a way to really hone in on good editing process?" And it says, "Are there specific things you should look out for when you're editing an interview?"
I think that's an excellent question, actually. And well, my technique at least, but everyone finds their own form here. But the technique I like to use is to when the first time I look at an interview in the editing suite, the important thing is to glue your eyes to the screen and glue your ears to the speakers. You know, because there's so much technology in an editing suite, and people are in so much of a hurry that actually, if you're not actually watching the screen and listening attentively, very attentively to that first run through, when you first listen through to it in the editing deck, you're going to miss the stuff that is the gold. So the technique I use is, for example, in Final Cut Pro 10, I use the marker button in Final Cut Pro 10, which is just the M, you know, and I'll be focusing very much on the screen, and every time I'm hearing something interesting, I'll just tap that M, and I'll end up with a timeline with a series of those little blue dots down the timeline where I've identified stuff that actually is potentially interesting. Then I'll run back down through, and I'll fill it out. I'll do a sync assembly, what we call an interview sync assembly. I'll pull out every bit that is halfway decent. I'll pull down onto the timeline, by which stage I've probably got about a 1/3 compression on the interview. I'll listen through that 1/3. I'll repeat the exercise with the marker, and I'll basically, after a couple of passes, I've probably taken it down to something that, you know, I've basically got the gold out of the interview. In my experience, if you do it any other way, then the chances are you're actually going to miss stuff, because you're going to dive in too early to stuff that you think is interesting, and you won't pay sufficient attention to other material in the interview that could have been really good. After that, it's a structuring exercise, and editing structure, in my experience at least, is about moving blocks around before getting too much down into the fine trimming, the fine cutting. So it's important to, you know, essentially to get the blocks down on the timeline, figure out roughly where the blocks go, and then you start whittling and compressing it down.
Okay. I hope that helped you, Dave. Phil has a question. Can you recommend microphones for interviews, good quality, but as inexpensive as possible without losing quality?
Very, very good question also. You know, it's, gosh, I mean, there's everything under the sun in terms of microphones. I think, I mean, my first port of call, frankly, is bhphotovideo.com. For microphones, for example. It's a little bit dangerous to recommend a specific shop, but the point is that when you go into bhphotovideo.com and you check out a particular microphone, you're going to see pretty good reviews. You know, the feedback on the specific equipment is pretty accurate, actually, in that particular site. So that's maybe a useful tip. I mean, clearly you have to make a decision about what kind of sound environment do you need to film in, or do you need to record in. Do you need to have, for example, something like a gun microphone, you know, which you can mount on the camera or have separately running in? You have classic microphones, depending on budget. You have classic microphones like the Sennheiser 416, for example, which is like a laser beam. You know, this thing you can be in a crowd and you can point this at someone's mouth and you'll isolate out that person's voice in the middle of a crowd. It's quite extraordinary what that particular microphone can do. Or you might have a requirement for a lapel microphone, for example, where you have to fix it onto someone. So I'm a little bit loath to name specific microphones, but I would give the advice to, I mean, decide what kind of mic you need first. Do you need a gun microphone because you're going to be running around? You need lots of different, filming situations, or are you principally going to be needing to stick something on someone's shirt? In which case, look for a good lavalier microphone, right? Microphone positioning actually is half the battle, because quite often people have quite nice microphones, but if you position them wrongly with respect to the voice, to the interviewee, frankly, you're throwing away the microphone. And positioning is actually very much also about experimentation, because you can walk into a room and actually the reflective surfaces or the desk or what have you are all going to have an impact on how the microphone records the audio. So what you should be doing is record a test, put some good headphones on, listen to the test, and trust your ears principally when you're working with sound and working with microphones. Sure, look at the level, check that it's not over-modulating and all the rest of it, but above and beyond that, actually listen back to a technical test to check that you're happy with the fact that it isn't distorted, it's not too airy, that it's nice and present, you've got a nice timbre and tone and so forth.
Yeah, so what you said about the environment as well is really important, because people can see here I've got just a blank white wall in the back, and we've just painted that this last weekend to make it blank and white. But they're going to see this room change as we do more and more of these. The next step is I'm going to be adding probably a drape or a curtain across the back that will absorb sound, and also in the front that you won't see, so that we can get a better sound in here as well. And I've gone through 3 different microphones in the last 6 months. Because I was looking for one that was easy to use and also had a better sound, and I'm kind of working my way up to that. I don't want a microphone that comes around like a radio microphone that puts right here in your mouth, although that's what podcasters use, and it is a better version for that kind of thing. But Paul, pull down your mic and show people what you've got there.
I wonder if I'll be able to show this on the camera. Hang on, I'll try and. It's well, this is a. You see, I'm spoilt because this is I'll try and get this into shot. This is a Sennheiser MKH60. So this is about $1,500 worth of microphone. This one, and I have this. This is on a professional XLR cable going through a digital audio interface, which allows this cable to connect to the USB on the laptop that I'm using right now. But the nice bit of kit that I've got with this is, well, first of all, I don't know if you guys can see it, but I've got the microphone in a shock mount here, which means that it's like a rubberized mount, which means that any vibrations on the floor, if I happen to knock something, it's not going to kind of come hammering through the soundtrack. It means that the mic is floating to a degree, which helps the recording tremendously, basically. But I mean, a really nice piece of kit, which if people have the budget, is definitely worth getting. And it's probably a little bit out of shot here, but it's something called a magic arm. And what a magic arm allows you to do is basically to move the thing you're trying to suspend around, and it has a locking lever, which means that basically you can clamp this thing into a desk, for example, you can clamp it onto a door, or anything like that, or a piece of furniture perhaps, put some cloth for damaged furniture. But basically it allows you to clamp it, and then the way I often configure this is I'll actually have, I'll just do it again now. I'll just clamp it off, I'll lock it off here, like that, and I'll very often have this, I'll very often have it, just to illustrate now, I'll very often have it suspended just above my head, because that's actually an optimum position for a microphone like this when recording. Very often it's not a particularly good idea to have a microphone pointing straight at the mouth, because you get a kind of popping or distortion effect sometimes. So, if you can have the microphone above you, pointing into the airstream, but fairly close mic'd, you get a very nice close presence of sound, but without it distorting. That's kind of the ideal.
Yeah, just to give a comparison, Phil, this is a Yeti Blue microphone. It's a desk-mounted microphone, and it was less than $100. So. He's got a $1,500 microphone. I've got a $100 microphone, and there's going to be a big sound difference, I'm sure. But it's really what are you willing to put up with for the amount of money that you're willing to spend, right?
What I would say is that I've heard very good things. Actually, I'll break the rule. I've heard something very good about the iRig microphone. There is a guy doing courses on Udemy called Alan Hill. He's a former radio broadcaster. He's using the iRig and he recommends it highly. And I saw a test with Alan where I think he was sitting next to a fountain or something like that. You know, the classic noise problem. You know, he's there on the iRig and it's isolating out his voice wonderfully away from all the ambient background noise. Very, very impressive result. And I think the iRig's like 60 or 70 bucks, for example. It's really, you know,
yeah, I actually have the iRig lapel version, and it works really well. It plugs right into your to your iPhone, and it works great. I love that. So,
yeah.
you know, we're running up on our time. Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, probably your audience are aware of this, but just in case they aren't, you know, in filmmaking and in video, and I would say online as well, good audio is more than half of the battle. It really is more than half the battle. It's incredibly important to have good audio, you know, because actually you can cover a lot of sins in film and video in image terms. There's a lot of tricks you can do to cover a bad image, but bad audio is very, very hard to cover up. So if you're thinking about your investments in terms of where do you spend the money and, you know, what's worth putting the money in, you know, don't skimp too much on the audio. Would be my advice.
Good. So, Paul, we are running out of time here, but I know that you have a course on that we're going to send people to, and tell people about that course and what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I've a 3-hour masterclass on the art of interviewing, interviewing A to Z, interviewing 101 is the way I would describe it, and it's. I take in that course. I take people all the way through from how to research, how to plan, how to prepare, how to produce, how to film, how to structure the interview, how to ask the questions, how to get the gold, how to edit the interview, how to distribute the interview. Blam, blam, blam. It's a fully worked up, 3.5 hour masterclass basically in interviewing. And yeah, normally I'm selling that course for 197 bucks, but for NAMS members it's 19 bucks. So there you go.
I'm sorry, did you say 19 bucks?
I said 19 bucks, yeah, 19.
I'm putting the link to that here in the chat box, and it is nams.ws/art of interview. nams.ws/art of interview, and it is in the chat box here. So be sure you go take a look at that. There's a little video there. It is a video sales letter, a short video sales letter, and it's just a buy button on a page. That's it. So jump into this, and you'll get more of Paul's interviewing techniques and masterclass. So, Paul, I really appreciate you doing this. This is called, let me just get it up on the screen here and see if I can bring it over and take a look at what people will see. Now, when they go into this, what kind of things are they going to learn in the masterclass?
Well, I kick it off by first of all defining what is a magic interview. You know, what is a really great interview? Because I think it's actually important to nail that down to keep as a kind of reference point for every interview you ever do. But then basically it's a step-by-step class, a step-by-step course in the art of interviewing. And I break that basically into the editorial side, which is how to construct the interviews, research them, conduct them in terms of being the interviewer, if you like, to get the absolute maximum benefit out, and then the technical side, which is basically how to make sure there's no technical screw-ups. You know, to make sure that you get down on tape, or you get down, you know, you record the thing, or you film the thing, you transmit the thing correctly in a way that allows it to punch through properly. And that's both in terms of the setup of the gear, the positioning of the microphone, the positioning of the lights, where you put the camera, things like angles, things like composition of the shot, things like reverse angles if you have to show the interviewer as well as the interviewee, for example, all the way through that kind of stuff. And then I get into the kind of exploitation of interviews a bit in terms of, you know, where you can use them to make money, basically, and to establish reputation and authority. And how to leverage interviews in terms of, for example, product creation. So what I tried to do was basically take my expertise as a filmmaker and put it into a series of scenarios where I felt that interviewing could be a useful form for people doing business online and marketing online. That's the course.
Yeah, and it says here that you're going to be able to use these techniques in a lot of your online business. It's really focused in using these techniques in your online business, right? It's not for people to become filmmakers.
Yeah, I mean, listen. If someone's a filmmaker or wannabe filmmaker, frankly, they're going to get quite a lot out of this because it's 20 years of condensed experience in 3 hours. But I did think of it principally in terms of online because I think that I mean, there's a kind of there's a business point and there's a kind of esoteric point here. The business point is that I think that interviewing, as indeed this interview demonstrates, is a fabulous way to get original content and to leverage that content out there for a business. Whether you're representing clients, whether you're, for example, doing reviews, whether you're product creating, whether you're making courses, whatever it is, there's loads of ways to use it, which are very profitable and effective. But I think beyond that, it's also about knowledge and insight dissemination. You know, we're kind of bombarded by information, frankly. We've had enough of the oceans of information. What we're interested in is those, it's those moments where it's those those aha moments. You kind of go, okay, got it. There's something I can use there. And if you can keep generating a stream of those aha moments in what you're doing with your online business or your communications, your marketing, and so forth, you're going to grab an audience. People are going to think, right, I'm going to come back to this guy's YouTube channel. I'm going to subscribe to this channel. I'm going to buy this guy's products next time around because this person, you only need 2 or 3 of those real clicks, those aha moments inside something for your buyers, for your prospects to kind of go, okay, I'm going to keep a tab on this person. But if you're putting out automated or semi-automated rubbish, which is just kind of computer-generated, kind of keyworded rubbish, basically, I mean, frankly, how far is that really going to get you? I'm not even sure that stuff's going to rank anymore, frankly, in terms of Google. I just think it's a hiding to nothing net. So yeah, the idea really is this is a method for original content generation.
Okay, good. So let me just tell you, there's a lot of appreciative people here for what you've shared with us today, and also what the pricing that you've given us on this. So Art says, "Wow, what a deal! Thank you so much, Paul." And Sid says, "90% discount sounds like a deal." Ann says, "Thank you, Paul. Truly appreciate your generosity." Mike, wow. Jennifer said, "I told myself I was not buying any more training or classes this year, but I'd be silly to pass up a deal like this one." And Ted says it's worth twice what the real amount, yet alone this kind of discount price. And Ted is one of your former Brits, so that's great. And says, "I promised myself the same thing, but this really fits into my upcoming plans." So let's talk about that for just a second, because one of the things that people have to learn, I think, in doing online business is you have to reach your audience and you have to be the authority. Now, a lot of people can figure out how to do business without ever showing their face online, but most of us at some point are going to have to use the technology to be able to either do presentations via video or do course training via video, or to be able to do Google Hangouts like this, talk to experts, talk to friends, find out more information, introduce people, do whatever it is that you need to do, or be a speaker at a conference or an event, or hold your own events. So all of those things that I just mentioned are going to be helped by learning how to do interviews. And I told you earlier, Paul, before we came on, that I felt like being a journalist was a double-edged sword, because I understood how to write. I understood the structure of writing, but I didn't understand the structure of writing for sales and business. And what you're talking about here is teaching people how to do interviewing for sales and business as well. And I'm really excited that you're doing that for our folks. Thank you so much for doing that.
It's my pleasure. No, it's been a real pleasure being here, David. Seriously.
Well, again, people can go to nams.ws/art of interview. I think we're going to hear a lot more from Paul as we go through additional training throughout the year, and we're going to stay connected with him because he's obviously somebody who's got a lot of knowledge. I really encourage you to go to that link that is I've put in the sticky at the top of the chat here in the webinar. It's nams.ws/art of interview. And I'm going to wait just a few minutes before we close this down so that you can still see the chat and still see the link here before we go on. But we will be going off the air live here in just a second. So Paul, again, thank you. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Cheers.